You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 3, Kidnapping, by R.A. Consul.
Chapter 17. Tourism. Arthur's family prepared for visits to the Blandlands very differently than Kuro did. He would scout the exits and observe the movements of people on both sides of the Vale. It could take days to determine the safest times to pass through without being noticed, and to establish contingencies if the path back became blocked. He would work to find clothes that matched the style of where he was going to better blend in and make every effort to ensure, once there, that nobody marked his passing. Lady Aino Murius employed the opposite strategy. She had everyone dress in bright colors with names of the places they were going emblazoned on them. They marched with blind confidence and made no preparation whatsoever. "You look like tourists," said Kuro, hoping the critique might make them rethink their choices. "Aye, in all honesty we are," explained Lady Aine. "This is standard practice. Were we dressed like locals, our accents would draw attention, as would our clumsiness navigating and general naivete. As we are, the Blandlanders will merely sneer and ignore us." He was skeptical. Being noticed went against every fiber of his being. What if someone wanted to follow them? There was no way to lose a tail when so brightly dressed. They couldn't disappear in a crowd or hide in a shadow. Besides the warnings of his relentless paranoia, wearing clean, new clothes seemed ill-considered given their route. "I wasn't aware of a local tear to Montreal," commented the knight. "It's not on our official register." "I probably know why," replied Kuro. "Here it is." "Where, exactly?" Arthur's mother had done an admirable job of not looking at the filth and squalor of Detritus Lane with disgust, but in keeping her head held high, she had failed to see the most interesting parts of the lane. "Right here." He directed her attention to the culvert that connected the lane to Montreal. "Do you still want to come?" The knight was not the only one whose enthusiasm for the expedition drained upon seeing the corrugated steel pipe they would have to crawl through to reach their destination. The layer of muck that normally coated the bottom was accompanied by an ankle-deep soup of early winter slush, seasoned with grit and filth, and garnished with litter. Lady Aine attempted to wash away the sludge, but her magic weakened and failed as it reached the threshold of the Vale. The half of the pipe she'd rendered spotless soon filled again with fresh muck. After a deep breath, she accepted her fate. She boldly led the charge on her hands and knees, despite not knowing what to expect on the far side. As if to demonstrate their bravery to their mother, Arthur and Moira followed shortly after. Azalea, having been there once already, allowed Kuro to go first, both for personal safety and to let him soak up a bit more of the slush to better clear the way. Kuro emerged to find the knight boldly standing on a too-narrow sidewalk with her back pressed against a graffitied wall, while traffic flew by much too quickly for the width of the road. Her equally brave children clutched at her coat and appeared to be trying to flatten themselves enough to wedge between her and the wall. He shook his head at the fragility of wizards, and turned to offer Azalea a hand to help her avoid the worst of the slush pooling at the Blandlands exit. He hoped that by the time the two of them had brushed off most of the slop, the others would have collected themselves. They had not. "You don't come out here very often, do you?" he asked, failing to hide his embarrassment at their behavior. Lady Aine tried to regain her proud and confident posture, though her habit of straightening a tailored gray suit jacket failed to have the same effect on a puffy coat worn over a bright red sweater. "Not infrequently," she said, "but most of the tears we use are to somewhat less populated areas. Suddenly finding oneself in the middle of a Blandland city can be a bit overwhelming." He looked around at the nearby highway overpass and nearly empty sidewalk. "This is kind of the outskirts, actually." That comment resulted in the brave and worldly Knight of the Sun relinquishing leadership to Kuro. He led them through the city, making frequent stops for them to ogle something entirely ordinary. They were impressed by any particularly large building or truck, wowed by electronics, and curious about the art on walls, signs, and cereal boxes. Kuro found a sudden kinship with Sir McCool having to lead students around the palace. He successfully navigated the buses and subway, following Marie's instructions, all while his flock murmured in wonder at how Blandlanders had managed to achieve such feats without the use of magic. The one good thing about traveling with a bunch of gawkers was that they drew attention away from him. Despite being their guide, he could have been invisible. The locals' eyes never fell on him, instead being drawn to the foreigners in their bright colors. Nobody risked an extended stare lest they make eye contact and risk the tourists engaging them in what would inevitably be a very painful conversation. The directions they'd been given were thorough, almost excessively so. They found her street without difficulty, though identifying her house was more of a challenge. The homes were built all attached together in rows, and it wasn't clear where one ended and the other began. The only difference between them was a small black number bolted to the brick, though some were missing, and many others were obscured by a coat of snow. Upon reaching a flight of wrought iron steps leading up to what they were fairly confident was her front door, a new problem revealed itself. "What do we say?" asked Kuro. "She won't be expecting us," added Arthur. "They probably kept that memory at the docks." "Did you not have a plan?" asked his mother, shaking her head and giving them a patronizing smile. "I suppose it's up to me, then." With a confidence befitting a knight, she mounted the stairs and rapped on the door. Moments later, it swung open and was filled by a long, lanky man with skin so dark he appeared like a silhouette with a sweater. He inspected the woman before him and scanned the collection of children through narrowed eyes. His size and silence might have been intimidating, but he wore a knitted sweater with snowflakes and a reindeer on it, which made it difficult to find him threatening. "Puis-je vous aider?" he asked. Then, noting the attire of the visitors, he repeated in English, "Can I help you?" "I'm so sorry to arrive unannounced," said Lady Ayn, so apologetically that he would have had to be a monster to turn her away. "These are friends of Marie's from school. They so wanted to surprise her for her birthday. But I do feel terrible for imposing. Please tell me we have the right house." His initial impassive stare vanished, and a broad smile burst forth. "Fantastique! So good to meet you!" The bright white of his teeth contrasted against skin even darker than Marie's to make them seem luminous. He shouted back over his shoulder while welcoming everyone inside. "Marie, someone is here for you!" The summons initiated a stampede. Thundering footfalls approached from all sides. A boy hurtled down a flight of stairs, barely avoiding being impaled by coat hooks at the bottom. A pair of children tumbled out of a side room, fighting each other to be the first to the door. Deftly dodging her older siblings, a young girl wove through the avalanche of bodies to the front, then, upon discovering several strangers, retreated behind her father. A shout from the back of the house rang out through the halls. It was French, but simple enough French and close enough to what the spring court spoke for Kuro to understand it. "Pierre, don't play on the stairs! Danielle and Julie, stop fighting! Isabelle, don't you dare step outside in your sock feet!" It was unmistakably the call of a mother, threatening, but in the way of thunder, a warning of worse things to come should the storm be encouraged to gather force. The owner of the voice emerged into the hallway. She was the spitting image of Marie. She had the same brown skin, dark eyes, thick black hair, and fierce scowl. The man at the door beamed at the 5 uninvited guests. "Of course, welcome, come in!" He swept his children aside to make way in the small entranceway. In the same breath, he asked, "Can I get you anything? Tea, coffee, or cocoa?" Followed by a shout up the stairs, "Marie, you have visitors!" The woman of the house seemed less enthusiastic about the horde of strangers invading her home, but the chance to turn them away had already passed. Instead, she inspected each as they entered, her brow furrowing further with shock and dismay at every pair of slushy boots in her entryway. It was clear from the creases in their faces which of the parents spent more time smiling and which frowning. Marie appeared at last to help the youngest child, Isabelle, collect jackets. The small girl tried valiantly to play the polite host and teetered under a pile of winter coats. Assisting her sister provided some degree of cover for the fact that Marie clearly couldn't remember their names. That was something Kuro had been prepared for, and worried about. If only Charlie had been there, she would have filled every awkward pause easily. But in this moment, the duty fell to him. I'm Kuro, and this is Arthur. We're Marie's friends, he said, pretending to introduce himself to the siblings rather than reminding her. He was prevented from having to make further introductions by Pierre, the staircase daredevil, interrupting. Marie doesn't have any friends, he sneered. If anything could shake her clear of the haze of uncertainty caused by having her memories stored off-site, it was an insult from her eldest brother. Tais-toi, she snapped at him, before stepping in to greet them properly with a glowing smile. Despite her sudden outward warmth, she was clearly still trying to weave together enough threads of memory to form a meaningful picture, as though she were meeting them again after years, not days. Fortunately, Lady Ayn picked up on Kuro's efforts and continued them much more gracefully. I'm Arthur's mother, Ayn. This is my daughter Moira and her friend Azalea. She continued to ramble, inventing reasons for them being in Montreal and for her accompaniment. She even managed to turn the presence of 2 children not her own to her advantage by saying that Kuro and Azalea had complicated family situations. That simultaneously made her look heroic for looking after such troubled youths, and ended any deeper inquiry into said situations, as it would be insensitive. She redirected the adults into the kitchen for the promised tea, leaving the children to fend for themselves. Happy birthday and Noel, said Kuro. Thank you, replied Marie carefully, as she fought to find any complete memory of the people in front of her. A considerable pause followed. Kuro attempted to break the building tension. I made you a present. Thank you, Marie said again. More silence followed as she respectfully unwrapped the flat rectangle. She admired the bronze bookmark, recognizing her own name at least. She ran her thumb over the embossed raven several times, as though nearly able to recall why that symbol might mean something to her. A problem was quickly emerging. Kuro and Arthur had no idea how to be friends with Marie in her own home, and Marie could barely remember that they were friends to begin with. Their usual activities of homework, walks in the summer quarter, and practicing magic were not going to fly in the Blandlands. They couldn't even talk about any of it in front of the other children, who seemed to have no interest in leaving them alone. Do you want to play a game? Asked Daniel. Yes, please, replied Arthur, eager to escape what was quickly becoming a very awkward staring match with Marie. Marie was less eager, seeming more inclined to get her self-proclaimed friends somewhere private and ask pressing questions like, Who in the world are you people? Arthur's rapid consent, however, stripped her of that option and meant that if she wanted to learn anything about him, she'd need to participate. Marie's siblings were shocked to discover that their guests hadn't played the game before. Its premise had something to do with rolling dice and taking everyone else's money. It soon became clear, though, that the true purpose of the game was to provide justification for fistfights between Daniel and Julie. The rules were only very loosely explained, as understanding them thoroughly might give the newcomers enough knowledge to be competitive. It was difficult to decipher anything more during play, as the Akinwande children did not speak English to each other. They didn't speak French, either. What came out of their mouths was an indecipherable mix of the two with no regard for consistent grammar, and with a considerable amount of Blandland slang. It wasn't as though they couldn't speak English. They were fully capable of making themselves understood when speaking with their guests. But to each other, they spoke at twice the speed using the most efficient word in either language. Kuro was eliminated quite quickly, a fact for which he was grateful. The idea of beating other people at something was anxiety-inducing, and this game, in particular, seemed to foster a competitive drive in people that he couldn't fathom. Even Marie, who had initially been reluctant to play, was now working to crush her opponents without mercy, reinforcing her dominance as the eldest. He was much happier as a bystander, though he was not the only one. The youngest of the siblings had sat out. Initially, Isabelle had wanted to play in a team with Marie, but after the first time Julie had tried to shove a game piece into Daniel's ear, she had retreated to a small study, which adjoined both the living room, where the dice were being rolled, and the kitchen. In that kitchen, the adults were expertly ignoring the commotion from the game. Kuro could overhear their conversation, and it didn't seem to be going well for Lady Ayn. It started with a friendly, I can't place your accent, from Marie's dad. His was equally unplaceable. Oh, I'm from Ireland originally, lied the knight with confidence. "But I've not been back in years. It's as much Toronto as it is Dublin at this point." The man brightened at that. "We have an old friend with the same story, Dublin to Toronto. We met when I was living down in Mississauga. Couldn't be that you knew each other." "Oh, I very much doubt it," said Lady Ayn, paddling quickly away from the trap being laid by her own cover story. "I don't know anyone from back home over here." The denial only led to encouragement for her to provide details about back home. Despite repeated efforts to steer the conversation towards the children, the house, Marie's parents, or the tea, the cheerful and enthusiastic man always managed to drive it right back to specifics about Lady Ayn's life, which she was rapidly inventing. Complicating matters, it seemed the man had lived or worked for some time almost everywhere on the planet. So whenever she imagined distant family members or anecdotes of travel, he'd been there. Marie's mother, on the other hand, seemed unwilling to participate in the conversation. She nodded along politely as needed, but spent the entire time with her mouth leaned against her fist, hiding her true expression. Inspired by the adults, Isabel decided to probe Kuro. "You have a strange name," she observed. While bold enough to engage him in conversation, she kept a leather recliner between her and the odd boy, her eyes just poking up above the armrest. "It's really more of a number," said Kuro, nodding in agreement. "Which number?" she asked, suddenly very interested by his strange reply. 9, he said. The eyes widened in surprise. "Do you have that many brothers and sisters?" "No, I'm the only one." "Your parents are not very good at counting," she judged the imagined pair harshly. "I guess not." Kuro couldn't help but laugh at that evaluation of Phineas. "Do you really go to school with Marie?" she asked. She was quite young, not even as tall as Kuro, maybe 6 or 7. The patches and wear on her clothes sang of hand-me-down fashion and reminded him a little of himself, though her wide-eyed innocence spoke of a life he'd never known. "Yeah," he replied, "I do." "What is it like there?" she asked. "Marie never wants to talk about it." Kuro puzzled over that question. What was it like? How could he compare it to anything this child would understand? "It has some nice gardens," he said, "and a forest and a boat. Other than that, I think it's like most other schools." Isabel interrupted his pondering about what else he could say. "Do you think I can go there when I am older?" "I don't know," Kuro said. Not liking the direction of inquiry, he looked for a safe exit, but his options were back into the open combat erupting by the board game or into the adult conversation. "Do you want to?" "Yeah, then me and Marie could go to school together?" It was such an endearing wish that he couldn't bear to shatter it. He recalled how desperate Azalea had been to join her big sister at Avalon. He couldn't be the one to explain that Marie would have graduated from high school before Isabel even started. He didn't need to be, he told himself. She had years to come to that understanding herself. "Do you want to see something?" she asked. He wasn't sure that he did. In his experience, that offer led to poking dead animals with sticks or life-threatening physical feats. Isabel was not Charlie, however, and the odds of her having a corpse hidden away somewhere in the house seemed slim. He looked to the adults. If any had heard the invitation, it hadn't caused a panic. "Sure." He was led upstairs to a small closet full of sheets and towels. Isabel pulled out a white box, which had been buried beneath old linens on the bottom shelf. She treated the box and its contents with reverence, as if the cardboard were the finest crystal. She gently removed a large scrapbook, with seashells glued to it and the word Florida in gold ink carefully hand-lettered on the cover. "This is from our trip before Marie went to your school." She proceeded to take him on a tour across the Blandlands, which they had driven across most of, paying special attention to any photograph in which both her and Marie appeared. "This is when Marie was teaching me to swim." She held up the book so Kuro could clearly see a younger Marie, grinning with a mouthful of braces and urging Isabel to join her in knee-deep water. The child regarding the water with deep suspicion despite wearing water wings and a life jacket. Every story she told added a pang of guilt until Kuro felt like his throat would close over. This little girl loved her big sister, and she'd been stolen away. Kuro was spending time with Marie that could have been Isabelle's. Even when Marie was home, it wasn't all of her. She was vague and foggy, not the full Marie Kuro had the privilege to know. Marie's eldest brother joined them, uninvited, in the upstairs hallway. "He doesn't want to look at that stuff," Pierre sneered. "Yes, he does," argued Isabelle. "Why are you here? Did you lose?" Pierre dodged the question. "I didn't want to play anyway," he said. "Hey, do you want to see the good pictures of Marie?" Not waiting for an answer, he marched into his parents' bedroom and pulled an unremarkable book off a shelf. "Don't," said Isabelle, trying in vain to overpower her brother. "It's mean." "No, it isn't." His smirk said otherwise. He opened the book to reveal a hollowed-out section inside filled with mementos. A watch, a lighter, some ticket stubs, and several small photos. "It's just old pictures. You want to see, don't you?" "I don't think I do," Kuro said, trusting Isabelle's judgment on the matter. "Are you a coward?" Pierre challenged. Kuro nodded. "Definitely. Yes, absolutely." Pierre was emboldened by the discomfort he was causing and thrust a photo into Kuro's line of sight. Channeling Arthur, he refused to react. He could guess why Pierre would think it was a fun photo to show. It was of Marie, younger even than Isabelle, before her braces, sitting on her father's lap. She looked silly drinking milk through a twisty straw due to her enormous overbite. A very regal overbite. That, though, was not nearly so troubling as the other photo. Caught by a slight breeze, a small, square picture with a thick white border fell from the secret container of keepsakes, landing face up on the floor. Ignored as inconsequential by the other children was an old photo of two young adults at some kind of Blandlands party. Marie's father, who was holding the camera at arm's length to capture them, and beside him, in blue jeans and a t-shirt with Canada printed on it, drinking from a red plastic cup and making a celebratory gesture, was a Dane, last princess of the summer court.
Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.